The Memphis Grizzlies have the 16th pick in tonight's NBA draft. Will they take this man or this man or neither one of those men? I definitely have my favorites. You've seen them, and I'll tell you about them, and I'll tell you why. But it may be totally wild tonight. We'll have to find out. This is Many Ways to Win. Hey everybody, Tyler Springs. Thanks for tuning in. Please like and subscribe to the channel if you enjoy the content. But first, let's talk about what's at hand. Me needing to change this shirt. I love the logo, but unfortunately, name on the back, yeah, gone. Gotta go. So we're gonna have to do a little bit of shopping here in the off season, and that's probably true of many Grizzlies fans. But it has opened up the possibility that Memphis is going to take an impact player in the first round, something we didn't think was possible 4 weeks ago. And I definitely have my favorites. I have guys I've fallen in love with. I will try to keep this fairly simple. But the two guys that I like the most are a little different, but they are both quote unquote smaller school wing players. You start with Cedric Coward, and boy, what a story. Look, I'm a Division III guy. So hearing the name Willamette as an NBA draft prospects original school was pretty shocking. But I'm so intrigued by this rise, among other things. Going from there and the whole story of him not being, I would say, the most serious or committed player as a younger athlete, and then going from quitting AAU in his junior year of high school to Division III, to being scouted just on one-off chance by a Division I head coach in that Division III season, going to Eastern Washington, following Coach Riley from Eastern Washington to Washington State, and then getting hurt this past season and not getting to showcase his full potential. It is, it is really, I would say, ripe in terms of potential narrative, right? And ascendance. If you want to be somebody that looks at storyline and says, hey, Cedric Coward could rise from complete obscurity in a way that was, not dissimilar from Jalen Wells and become an impact player in the NBA. Now, Wells, obviously, as an all rookie team player last year, big shoes to fill in that regard. Whoever gets drafted in the first round by the Memphis Grizzlies, if it is Coward, it can go a lot of different ways. Look, I don't want to put him too much in the Jalen Wells camp. He's not, I don't think, the shooter that Jalen Wells is. We haven't seen that necessarily profile from him over the course of a long season. I also don't want to put him in the Zaire Williams camp, right? Like, Grizzlies fans have a memory of a lanky wing that played a short season for a Western school, and the potential was based mostly on projection. Yeah, that sounds a lot like Zaire Williams 2.0. But for one thing, Williams was a top 5 rated recruit that season. Top 5 or top 10, either way, a 5-star recruit when he went to Stanford. Cedric Coward has come from nowhere to become one of the fastest risers on NBA draft boards. So I don't want to put those two in the same camp. Coward is, to me, at least from the clips I've seen, far from a prick player. Okay, on defense, he definitely gets hung up on screens. He's a step slow at certain points. When the shot isn't falling, it can be frustrating, obviously, and just in general, he's kind of still like finding his frame in terms of the ability to navigate the court with a capable handle. I've seen the word sloppy used. I might use the word awkward in terms of passing and dribbling himself into different situations and getting out of it. So I think those things certainly show up on the tape. But when it works, boy, when it clicks, it is really, really cool to watch. I mean, he's got a mid-range game. He's got a post-up game. He can drive to the rack and switch hands in midair. He can hit the three ball. There's so much to like offensively, and he's got the burst defensively to recover, to go for chase down blocks, the length to get some steals. So it is really a tantalizing package. I would say this with extreme caution, an abundance of caution, okay? There were flashes, and I emphasize flashes of bigger wings on his tape, that have gone on to become huge things in the NBA. Okay. I know how ridiculous this sounds when I say it, and this is why I emphasize shades. I thought there were certain times, particularly with the post moves in the mid range game, where I felt like there were shades of I'll just say it: Michael Jordan and Penny Hardaway in the game of Cedric Coward. If it works, if it is maximized to the ultimate level, those two guys, most importantly, though, very different from Coward in this way. Jordan, I think, was proven to be much more physical and much tougher, and I think probably a better defender at this time in his career than Coward is. And Penny was, I think, a lot more slippery and graceful at his size while offering that kind of bounce. And obviously, those guys were well-known commodities, at this point in their careers going into the NBA draft, far more than Cedric Coward. And I think um, that has to affect the way we perceive what Coward can become. But it was fun to watch Coward's highlights, and I emphasize the highlights there, and wonder whether or not those can become consistent, and he can avoid some of the erratic play that you saw at Washington State and Eastern Washington. Because if he can, that could be a really cool piece for the Grizzlies on the perimeter as a guy who is known to play inside. Obviously, the Division III level has that footwork and has that awareness, but also now developing even more on the perimeter and switchable. The other guy that I liked, that I showed you obviously off top, was Neat Clifford from Colorado State. And to me, the thing that stood out about Clifford watching him on a longer stretch of tape with a lot of clips was he's a little slight. I recognize 6'5". You got room to put on a fair amount of muscle. If you want to at the NBA level, to try and hold up against bigger guys that you're going to be defending. But it seemed like there were times that he had a little trouble hanging against guys that were more physical than him on defense. But otherwise, I think he showed a lot of promise defensively. He goes to the glass willingly, which is great for a guard. Um, I think he also has shot the ball better from the outside this year. I think that the stats back that up. As a fifth-year player, you'd expect more physicality. You'd expect a little bit, better shooting, but you at least expect this to be the best shooting of his career, and this matches that, right? You want to be a little more physical, but again, if he goes and gets the rebounds, then that's hopefully proof that he can go and do the same thing in the NBA, even though he was doing it, this year as a fifth-year guy. I think what's interesting about Clifford is I watched him twice in the NCAA tournament, and I think on the biggest stage, I recognize, I think one of the caveats in scouting is right. Don't count the tournament twice, right? Like it may reinforce what you saw during the season, but it can't be bigger than the season. The thing that stood out to me about Neat Clifford, as you take another look at him, is I don't think that's from the NCAA tournament. I think it is from a different game, but when he was leading Colorado State and Nico Medved, who's now at Minnesota, against Memphis and Maryland. I watched all of those two games because obviously I have a rooting interest in the success of the Memphis Tigers. I grew up a Maryland fan, so it was really interesting to see them in that particular environment with a great prospect in Derek Queen, who's expected to go highly in the NBA draft. I thought in those two settings, Clifford gets one of the highest compliments I can give as a fan, which is I texted a couple of buddies of mine. And I said, as a Maryland fan, I think Neat Clifford should have been a Duke Blue Devil. He brought that level of swagger and talent and timing to the floor where you just felt like he's bulletproof. What am I supposed to do with this guy? You have to respect that even when he's on the team on the other side. You hate playing against that. And I think it would be really special for the Memphis Grizzlies to get a guy like that in the draft at 16. So we'll see what happens. Maybe, you're a Grizzlies fan, you prefer a center to platoon with Zach Edey if you want to do that, like a Thomas Sorber. You have to convince me Sorber gets that low to 16. You can certainly consider a kind of, I don't want to say off the wall, but a different prospect in Colin Murray Boyles, who obviously is undersized, trying to play in the low post, and that would present a very different look for the Grizzlies than Edey does right now. Even though the skill set obviously for Murray Boyles is limited, it's a defensive emphasis if you go that route. So I'm pretty interested to see what it is, and I think this is honestly, it's not true every year. This year, it's true that Grizzlies fans are hanging on every single word of the broadcast because they have all four teams in their division picking ahead of them in this draft. And they also have the defending champion Oklahoma City Thunder right in front of them. And people who remember last year's draft, I think will think back and recall that it was reported that the Grizzlies were trying to trade up for Donovan Clingan, who ultimately went to Portland. The Grizzlies could not trade into a position ahead of Portland to get him. So they ended up going with Zach Edey instead. And I think they would say they like the investment so far, and time will tell how it all works out. But I wonder whether Zach Kleiman had that in mind when he made the trade negotiating to send Desmond Bain to Orlando last week and getting the haul of picks back, whether that could be used tonight to try and get the Grizzlies to move up to a position that gets them in front of one of those teams where they wouldn't want to have to play against a guy that they had targeted, year in and year out, frequently from teams in their division, or more importantly, a team like the Oklahoma City Thunder, adding to what's already a deep cache of talent over there. So we'll see. It'll be super interesting. And if you've got other opinions about tonight's NBA draft and the Grizzlies pick, please shout me out in the comments. Let me know what you got, and I'll try and respond. Really interested to hear what you think. This is Many Ways to Win.